it just makes it more on fire because it all intertwines, right? Like if you're talking about money, purpose, impact, people, like they all feed off each other. And so hopefully throughout this lifetime, we can make a dent, you know?
Yep. That's it. I've said all the time, just one.
Yeah.
Just one. Move the needle, just one. Every single individual has a story to tell, and they're great stories that need to be heard.
I want every listener to know they have the ability to change the world.
Welcome to the 1720 Podcast.
What's up, Mount Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 Podcast. Stewie, these last 2 weeks were awesome, my man.
Yeah, depending on who you are and what stage of life you're in, they hit different, you know, but Kevin was awesome. Not you, you're not awesome. Kevin Butler was awesome, and Eddie was on fire, and I got lots of feedback in the last 2 weeks, which, as listeners have heard me tacitly complain.
Yeah.
I don't get a lot of. So, yeah.
I think I told you with Kevin's, I laughed out loud during the Daniel bit. And
who's Diesel?
Yeah. Who is Diesel? We kept referencing somebody who has no idea what we're talking about. We forget we're in our own little weirdness bubble.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, I was having coffee with a guy a couple days ago. Oh, I remember who it was. It was Adam Tarnow, who's coming on in a few weeks. And we got to talking about the podcast and what we do and what it's like and things like this. And he says, you know what it sounds like is The Ticket. Do you ever listen to The Ticket?
No, but I've heard that a few times.
About the podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'd never heard that before, but Adam was saying, like, because we have a great group of followers, because there's like some podcast vernacular, because it's a little bit kind of just off the cuff from time to time. He's like, it sounds like The Ticket. And then we get to talking about how influential The Ticket is in DFW in its specific space. And so it's kind of a humongous compliment given like the scope. They're winning Marconi Awards and everything, the scope of what The Ticket's up to sort of be in the same sentence with them, but
I couldn't
it's not too far afield.
The last time I listened to regular radio, could not.
For me, I can tell you when the last time I listened to regular radio was 15 minutes ago before I sat down to record because I was listening to Take a Shot. What was I listening to?
I couldn't even tell you the numbers.
On the regular radio, like what was coming through the speakers?
Rap.
No, NPR. Like I was listening to NPR. It was...
nerd alert.
It was actually a very interesting, I'll have to go back and find the book, but there's a interview with a Harvard psychologist about the way people negatively interpret things and how people have their own paradigms as to communication modalities and why you value the things in your closet so much that you can't get rid of them. This like psychology of like the way you believe that the way you do everything and the things that you have are the most important. And so as I was listening to it, I thought, man, that's actually a really good book to read and plug and dig through, just because I know we all wrestle with communication styles and making sure we're being heard and hearing properly and valuing other people's things and all this. So as nerdy as it sounds when I say I listen to NPR on the way over here, it's actually super interesting. So,
hey, man, if you got something out of it, it worked.
It worked. Yeah, I'll try to find that book and drop it in the notes. It was a Harvard psychology professor who had written a book called Thinking 101, I think.
I don't know if listeners were able to pick up on it with Eddie, but in person, listening to him tell this story and how emotional he would get anytime he brought up family or God, like that is 100% authentic. That dude's on fire for Jesus, man. I don't know if you felt that vibe too, but it was incredible. It was actually inspiring. Like, man, I want to walk like that.
Yes, I did pick it up. It was palpable in the studio. I wonder if it translated out through the airwaves.
I think if you're kind of like listening while doing something else, multitasking, you might not pick it up. But if you're like intently on it, you'd pick it up. But because I was flying back from DC when I listened to it, and I had some other things going on. And I even didn't fully pick up on it, but I was like, man, I'm glad I was in that room for some of those moments because it was pretty touching.
He did the couple 3 times. That gives me chill bumps, and you could like look over and see chill bumps on his arms, and that sort of like moments captured here on the podcast. It definitely happened. I hope it, like I said, I hope it translated.
Yeah, awesome story, awesome dude.
Yes, for sure. Have you ever flipped over and listened to some of the stuff they're doing on his Unafraid podcast? Have you listened to that?
Some of it, yeah.
There's a new one this week. It might have been since we recorded with them, I can't remember the date, where they did this situational awareness drill. I don't know how it actually worked just listening to it, but he had set up like a scenario where something bad was going down, but like it was like at a football game. And then talking through like, okay, in this instance, have you and your family contemplated X, and what happens if Y happens, and like really like walking you through these situational awareness ideas. And apparently they've done a few of them. This is just the first one I caught. So loop over there, man. It was actually very interesting. I listened earlier this week, I guess it was.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of his silos is those everyday situations. What do you do in that? I know he does some segments with his wife, some with his ghostwriter, Keith Wood. So he's got it sprayed out there, man. That's for sure.
For sure. You said earlier you had spent some time in DC. I know while you were there, but how's DC?
It's cool, man. It's always inspiring when you get together in the construction industry and it's leaders around the nation that come together just for trying to better the industry. They're all there for predominantly the same reason. It's not about me. It's about we, and how do we get better? How do we do best practices? But it was a AGC leadership convention, and it's just one of two phases for onboarding to become TEXO chairman next year. And it was awesome, man. I had Melanie by my side the entire time. She knows Washington, D.C. So I'd point at a building, I'd say, what is that? And she would tell me what it is and a little history behind it. And I was like, man, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But I was super impressed with the city. You see a lot of things in media, that might contradict what's actually out there, but it was clean. It was friendly. And I think you actually told me before going, like, cause I asked you, hey, is it going to be safe to run? Which I have a funny story about that. But yeah, it would have been safe at all hours, man. Like, super clean, super historic, friendly. The weather was great, and got to meet some really great people that really care about our industry. So check.
Yeah, I've been a number of times, so I had a little bit of insight when you went as to a few things. I can remember going for AGC stuff previously, and I don't remember exactly why I was there. Some sort of leadership deal, but we ended up talking to. There was a group of, at the time I was younger, and a group of younger folks who I will never forget from all over the country had heard about our YCC. And so me, and I'm trying to think who all was there. I can remember Matt Bauer being in the conversation. We were standing.
Yeah, he's a great dude.
We're standing in a room talking with a bunch of young folks from all over the country, asking like, what were we doing and how were we doing it and why was it awesome and how could they help? I mean, how could we help them do it better? And, I had a bunch of good ideas that I don't think any of them really fully materialized out of that, but just this idea that, man, we think that we live in this little bubble of Texas and Texo and our little construction industry, but there's a real spotlight on top of it because we are doing a lot of great things for the industry here. So
yeah, and super shout out to Melanie. I got a front row seat to her legendary status. She's really well respected and deservingly so. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things we had talked about was while you were there was going and taking a run on the mall. Did you get it?
So the day before, I got an email from the AGC, and it said, hey, just found out there's probably going to be some road closures because there's a half marathon Sunday morning. And I'm like, I just laughed out loud when I got the email, and I screenshot it to Melanie, and I'm like, heads up. And so on the flight there, we tried to register for it, but it was sold out. So we couldn't do it.
Man.
But we were on a whim going to go and run it. And Ronnie, Melanie's husband, even said, hey, don't pull a hamstring going with Kevin. Like when he dropped her off, like knowing that I got to screw loose. And if we're getting in that marathon, we're getting in.
Yeah, that's funny.
So we couldn't do it.
Was it? So you couldn't get on the mall because it was shut down?
Well, Sunday it was, but Melanie took me around there. Must have been Monday.
Yeah. When William and I were there, we spent a third-ish to half of our time up and down the mall. The archives were right there. The Smithsonian's are there. Up and down to the Washington Monument, to the Capitol, out to Lincoln, around the Tidal Basin, over to see the Jefferson Memorial. And there were moments with William. I may have talked about it on here. There were moments with William on that trip along those spaces where you were that like I will never in my whole life forget. They were just super cool moments. Here's a really cool.
I'm sorry. Go
ahead. I was gonna say here's a really cool moment too. Is like as we got around to the back of the Capitol where some of the lesser known buildings are. Library of Congress is back there, but the United States Supreme Court was actually on that back road. And we walked by. There weren't actually protesters, but it was the week leading up to the Roe v. Wade leak. And so there was lots of evidence of protesters there, including signs taped to fences and lots of chalking on the ground around the implications of the decision, right? And so then William and I talked for 45 minutes, kind of walking back to the hotel that day about like why those people were there and what the import of it was and why that was a thing and what it meant to our society and all this. And it was like just like conversations with a 14-year-old that I could have never replicated just being here.
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of like
for sure.
highlighted the value of getting away from the things that distract you temporarily at home, so that you can have those moments to have that conversation, which we never had if we hadn't happened to zoom by the Supreme Court that day. So
Yeah,
really cool.
those are cool memories, man.
Yeah. What was your deal? You were gonna say something?
One of the big things I learned was next to the White House, like catty corner, a block or so away, is the white townhouse. So you have, for the incumbent, their family or him, after election, he stays in it's like a grouping of monopoly townhomes, 3-story, and there's one white one. And I didn't know that that's the chill spot until you get into the big home.
Oh, that's funny. I
had
don't
no
think
idea.
I knew that
So
either.
I took a picture of that. I'll have to, if you didn't know about it, I'll have to send it to you. But that was another Melanie gem she pointed out. I'm like, I didn't even know that happened.
You know what's funny about the White House is you think about the front view where you're like adjacent to or between the Washington Monument and the White House, where the road kind of swings out and there's tons of security there and you don't get a great shot. But you go to the other side, I think it's the north side. You're like a stone's throw away from the White House. On the backside, it's so close, and so lots of people don't wander over there to catch the super cool photo ops. But on the backside, that's where it's really cool.
We had one happy hour that overlooked it from a rooftop balcony. That was pretty cool, man.
Just it is what it is, right? Is they're the center of our government, our federal government, but there's so many cool things about it. And if you know what you're looking for, you're like, oh, this is L'Enfant Plaza, and here's who that was, and here's why it's important, and these little dots mean that, and they symbolize X or whatever. If you have like the time to figure it all out, it's very, very fun. So,
yeah.
All right. So we have a pretty big topic. I don't know how long we talk about it today, but a pretty big topic. And I might let you pre, but I'll try to do the best I can, to just talk through like this notion. And it resounded in a DM from maybe 2 weeks ago. I think it was titled Faith, Word, Obedience, Action. Where you had sort of riffed on this idea that, maybe I'll let you do it. The gist of it is like being intentional in your walk with Christ, listening, and being obedient starts to like generate this energy. I'll just say it like that, and then I'll let you start talking, and then I got a few questions to pinpoint in and around it. But did I get it right? Did I get as close to the topic?
Close enough, man. It's been a really cool season. As you know, you're always getting a front row seat into the action of life for me, and vice versa. And it's been really cool. The faith and consistency of, reading the Bible every weekday, going to church as many Sundays as possible. If I'm out of town, obviously I can't, but other than that, we're always there. And now serving Wednesdays at Switch, which we'll get to after this, but like all that intentionality, like it's creating these experiences that those count on one hand experiences. I'm having like 3 of them in the past 2 weeks where like there's a closeness, a confirmation, a word from him that makes me uneasy, but I know I have to do now, but because it's clearly him. And man, that's addicting. So like, it's holding me more accountable. Like I don't want to lose that closeness. So it's making me better. Like I'm sure the non-swearing, like now when I'm lifting, when a hard rock song comes on, it starts swearing. I just next it like no, miss me with that. I'm trying to stay focused here. And, it's been a really cool season. I know it's just a season, right? Highs and lows, ebbs and flows, but man, I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts. And hopefully it'll last a long time.
There's a couple of things in there that I think are important to linger on, right? One of them is the idea that intentionality is what is, at least for your story here, is what's breeding the intimacy, right? Like you don't have the feelings that you have, you don't hear the things that you hear, and I mean hear like in a sort of spiritual sense, audibly or not, without having some intentionality, spending the time at church, in prayer, in your daily readings, whatever. Like it doesn't happen historically, traditionally, in my experience, if you're not spending that time doing it,
Right.
Because you're distracted, you're not tuned into the right station, therefore you don't hear what's playing on that station, et cetera. And so that's like a really, to me, valuable part of this season for you is like, I'm in it. I'm doubled in at you. I'm in it. I'm doing it. We've talked about it a few times, but I can remember this. There's a particular sermon where they talked about the guy actually unhooked have I told you this? The unhooked the Mustang steering wheel?
It doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, so here's the story in short, and it kind of gets me back to the point of intentionality. We show up, and he's got like a steering wheel up on stage with him. And he's talking about how that's the steering wheel from his, I think it was a 68 Mustang, 69 Mustang, something like this. And he said, but like, this doesn't mean anything to you because it's my steering wheel in my car, but let me tell you about my car. And he starts talking about like when he got it and how he spent time with it and like he cleaned it and he showed it to people and he talked about it. And over the process of like spending all that time with the car, he learned to like love that car. But you don't love it like that because you haven't spent the time like that. And that's like a really silly sort of worldly example. But when you just take it and you plop it right over to spending time with Jesus, it starts to hit a little different. You're like, oh, right. Like I don't love Jesus if I haven't spent time with him and I haven't like washed all the parts and polished the, like if you don't, I'm trying to cross that metaphor over, but like if you don't do the things that are necessary to learn about it, there's no way you could love it. And that's this season is like you've been doing the things that are necessary to learn, not to learn again, but like to lean in. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, no, it's a great parallel.
So that you're ready. So kudos to you. The other thing I want to linger on for just a second is I am always fascinated by people actually like hearing. And I don't know if I mean audibly, but hearing. And so I want to interrogate that a little bit to the extent you'll share, like what that felt like, seemed like, sounded like, looked like, et cetera. And I'll give you one more story to just kick it to you. I was talking with Ashley the other night, and we were recounting Eddie's podcast where he was talking about how early on, like he saw Jesus in his room, right? And it terrified him. That whole story. And I wasn't like suggesting to her that I didn't believe it. I was just like suggesting like it's hard for me to believe that because I never have experienced and I don't know what it's like, and it's hard for me to like really be there. I'm not saying he didn't feel that at all by any stretch of the imagination. I just kind of don't understand. And then she said, do you know, and I forget who it was actually, and if I did, I wouldn't say his name. So-and-so, he has that exact same story. And I was like, what?
Whoa.
And it's a kid who's like in some of our circles with our kids, right? And I was like, really? Tell me more about that. And so she sort of told the story as best as she could recount it. And it's different, in a couple of ways. He doesn't remember being terrified like Eddie said he was. But similar, like in his room, in the evening, blah, blah, blah. And I just like am always fascinated by people's encounters with Christ, right? And so tell me, I know yours come usually like in the morning, like when you're getting your like absolute wiped out on, but I think maybe they show up in different spaces too. So tell me what you can tell me about that.
Sure. And I'll rewind to like, this closeness, I wasn't aiming for hearing more words. Like it was just, I need to gradually build up in my faith. Right. And like, just take these steps. So it wasn't all at once. I added the Bible reading, then I added the consistency of church. I started removing swearing. And then I started the serving Wednesday. And it's just that gradual buildup. And it's definitely some of the moments that have happened recently. They're not the gym visions, like they're not that when my endorphins are flying because I'm lifting. It's just like random moments. And so the first one was I had heard a story, and I've told you about this, and maybe even on air. Oh, no. It was a daily motivation of somebody, a family living out of their vehicle. And then I heard that story from like 3 different families in like a month, man. It's just like brutal to hear that, right? It's alive and well in our Metroplex. So one just started going to our church, and her son was saved, and she worked at the Subway inside the Walmart right by my house. And I heard that story from Sam, or Pastor Sam. And then like I just went about my day, and it lingered. And so I don't remember where I was or no, I remember where I was. I don't remember where I was going, but started my truck. I was in the driveway, and God just put on my heart. He said, ask Sam her name, go to Subway, give her money, and give her a good word. And I was like, okay, like that sounds cool. Like no burden there whatsoever. It might be awkward. So So I text Sam. I'm like, hey man,
no burden there.
Yeah. Well, like, cause some of them, so got her name. I show up and hey, I'm like, hey, I'm looking for such and such. And I look like a cop. I know that. And so they're like, well, why do you need her? I'm like, oh, we go to church together. That's all. And so I had to try again because she wasn't on her shift yet. And then by the time I came, she was expecting me. And she's like, are you the person looking for me? And so I actually gave her some 1720 bands. I didn't even tell her about the podcast. I just said, hey, this is my favorite scripture. Have faith to move mountains. You're a mountain mover. Just know you're loved, and went on my day. And I actually called you right after. Yeah. And like after you didn't answer because you never answer.
That's not true. Go on.
Like I felt extremely burdened. I didn't feel like, oh, we did something good. It was like heavy, dude. Like there's so much to do, man. And I wouldn't say it was a bad fit. It was unique. I wasn't expecting it. I was like, oh my God. Like it hurts. It hurts to know that that's in so many spaces out here. So that was the first one. And
let me stop you for a second, because I'm interested in the connotation of the word burden there. You know, like what do you mean by that?
It was just heavy. It weighed heavy, and I felt more sad than happy after that interaction because I know how prominent it is. Like that didn't move the needle much. You know, she knows she's loved. That's great, by a stranger. But like she still has to face tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And how many more people are just like her, you know?
Yeah.
That was, I guess maybe using the wrong word, but that's it.
No, I don't think it's the wrong word. I just was curious, like what that meant, you know, like what that meant to you. I could postulate a few different ideas. I was just curious, like, how does that specifically hit? And I get that. It's like, it's her in this moment multiplied times every day, multiplied times numbers of people we don't even know.
Right.
And there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of, well, and you multiply that across, not to Debbie Downer it, but like that's her particular instance. That's her particular burden right now in this stage of life. But there are millions of others, some of which are visible, some of which are not, right? It kind of harkens to some of the stuff Eddie was talking about last week, right? Like, dude, all that stuff was on the inside. You look at him from the outside, you'd be like, oh, dude, that dude has an awesome job. He's a legit superhero. And on the inside, just eating him alive. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those stories multiplied over and over and over again, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just the broken nature of humanity is everywhere.
Yep.
And everybody's wrestling with something. Sometimes it's living in your car. Sometimes it's depressed. Sometimes it's X. Sometimes it's addiction. Sometimes whatever, you know, everybody's wrestling with something.
Well, and like knowing my purpose, right? It just makes it more on fire because it all intertwines, right? Like if you're talking about money, purpose, impact, people, like they all feed off each other. And so hopefully throughout this lifetime, we can make a dent, you know?
Yep. That's it. I said all the time, just one.
Yeah.
Just one. Move the needle, just one.
So there's another, like, got the word. And then I'm going to give you an awesome, like, aha story. That's kind of like a crazy circle. But the second just word dropped on me was during worship. So just singing, and I was in my feels, and then
did you say in your field? Did you say in your field?
Because it doesn't it's very rare when it happens. Like when I'm like, when I look at somebody else and I'm like, I want to be there. Like, you know, like that sort of feeling.
What you're saying.
So
I know what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So I even know the worship song that was on, and then God just dropped on me. He's like, this is how you're starting your book. And we've talked, you know, I'm flirting around with a book idea, and how I now need to start the book is something that I wasn't even planning on putting in the book because I'm ashamed of it. And that's how it's going to be opened. So that was one to the previous comment. That's the one that's like, ugh.
Oh,
okay.
Right.
Reluctantly.
I guess if that's what I'm supposed to, I will lead these people into the wilderness.
Yeah.
You're supposed to.
But it's, you know what? After it made me very uneasy, but processing it now, like, man, I'm human and I'm broken and I've made mistakes. And there's no imposter syndrome because I know I don't deserve what I have in my life, but I'm going to use it to the best of my ability to impact people, you know?
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll set the stage for like, hey, this isn't me preaching from some sort of ivory tower. Like, I'm broken too. So here we are.
I think that's part of, okay, so two thoughts. And I think I actually have two.
Boom.
Boom. I think that's part of that's one of the major criticisms of Christianity, right? Everybody marching around like they got it all figured out. And then when you slip, you're like, aha,
got him.
Didn't have it figured out. Got him.
Yeah.
That's not what, right? So the inauthenticity, the traditional inauthenticity around it is what causes like people to stumble.
Yep.
Right. And I think maybe there's 3 points because we've talked about how that's like not unique, but pervasive in like manhood. Like dudes want to be tough and pretend like they all got it together. But I'm also thinking that it is like perhaps somewhat unique to America too, right? Like we're got the bull by the horns. We've got it all figured out. We're capitalistic. We don't need anything besides ourselves. All this, go get some fancy pants and wear them around so that I'm fancy, sort of a thing. Also, it's just, I think, probably unique to the Western culture.
Yeah.
And so it's raining down on us hard. And so whenever people are vulnerable, whenever people say, you know what, I did do that thing and I regret it and it caused a lot of pain and I've reconciled all of those issues, there's some real, like, actual joy and actual happiness and actual, like, okay, I'm here for that. That happens when people are do those things and are like that in those moments.
For sure, man. Spot on.
That's why Eddie's book's awesome, right? Because he's not like, hey, check me out. I'm awesome. I saved America.
Not at all.
It's like, no, man, I thought it was a total wreck,
Yeah.
but for.
Yep.
Yeah.
And still working on ourselves. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. I'm prep sheet reverting here, but you got me a note that says Quinn School. There's a chat somewhere in there.
Yeah. So like it's kind of this one's a long play, not just a word dropped in immediate action or 180-degree swing, right? So the whole farm story. We're looking for farms. I find Sadie's bio that says I'm going to convince my husband to get farms. I think we've told that on air. So at one point we were home shopping. In the back of my brain, I was like, man, I'm bummed. I feel like I'm finally finding a church community. And now as soon as we get our feet settled, we're going to move out of this town, and it kind of held me back from serving. Meanwhile, my daughter starts kindergarten and we tried to get her in the transfer portal and she didn't get in. So she was going to the ISD school that is by her house.
Transfer portal?
Yeah.
I thought that was for D1 athletes.
Well,
bro.
I know, but I parlayed that to kindergarten now.
Okay. That's a
it's
thing.
legit. I don't know what it's actually called, but yeah, you try to transfer out of that school to a better one.
I had no idea.
And she didn't get it, no news, bad news type thing. So she had her first day of kindergarten. 2 weeks later on a Friday night, we got a message from the principal saying, hey, there's a slot open. You could come tour the school Monday morning. And if you like it, she'll start Tuesday. So we took off Monday morning and it was in an unbelievable school, night and day different, and got her immediately in and a game changer. And what that did is that's K through 6. And we don't want to uproot her from that school now. And now it locks us into this location, which now locks us into that church. And it all makes sense now. It wasn't the order that I wanted it, but it was the order that it was going to go. Right. And they're all interconnected. It's not an A to B, but there's several threads in that web there.
Well, that eventually, or not eventually, but, lead towards you hanging out with a bunch of children at school, or not at school, at church rather, which is, I know, awesome because I know what older kids are like.
It is now. So Life Church does this thing called Switch, and it's for 6th graders through 12th graders. And so there's fun activities in the lobby, and then there's a service with worship and a message, and then we break into life groups. And so I got assigned for the first couple weeks 6th graders, and 6th graders are savages. 6th grade boys are savages. And trying to wrangle them in and deliver a message was I was not good at it. So I think I got fired from 6th grade and I got moved to 8th grade. And there's this dude, Tanner, which we'll get into him in a minute. But Tanner took over 6th grade and he's calm as a cucumber. He's like, dude, this is easy. I'm like, thank God, literally that you're here. And so they put me to 8th grade. That's a big difference, man. And so now we're getting into some deep stuff. And I leave that energized when I get to share just like leadership stuff, God stuff, my story stuff, but then I'm trying to get it out of them. And I'm learning, right? This is new. It's 10 8th graders and me. But it's making me better at home too. Like when Quinn's snapping, I'm like, you're just one person. Like I'm used to 10 of these kids going nuts.
Well, and you get a bunch of different flavors for kids are crazy. They go through crazy phases. They do crazy things. It's not about right now. It's about then. And, you know, like one of the, we actually stole this from Tyler Costin, but one of the things we say a lot at home is none of this is like surgery. This is all braces. Yeah. It's not going to get fixed overnight. Whatever the issue is not going to be resolved by some wisdom nugget that you drop. It's going to be like the consistent and repetitive involvement in those kids' lives is what changes it. It's not like hey man, stop doing that. And then it's, I should stop doing that. And it's over, you know?
What feels good is I got these like 3 to 5 kids that as soon as they let the big group out, they come find me. They're like, hey, come on. Let's go get that quiet room. Cause they want to break it down, man. And they go deep, dude. There was another one in that group that talked about living out of their vehicle, man. That was the third. Man. He's just like brutal, but he's on the other side of that now, but it's just, to admit that in front of your group, that's vulnerability for a, young man.
Yeah. One of the things the Watermark is trying to like pivot away from is just like the cattle call for small group, because it doesn't have that like, boy, I don't want to talk about that in front of Jimmy because Jimmy will go to school and talk about it. Yeah. I need to find, we need to collect the group of folks who understand that like this is a moment to share and keep it in the box while we work on stuff. And so it sounds like maybe those 3 who are hustling you up are in the safe zone with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And they get bummed so that was one of the perspectives last week or 2 weeks ago. I was trying to give them, they get bummed when more people come in. I'm like, man, I get that you got this little fishbowl right now, but let's create the same experience that's gotten y'all close with them. Like, let's get them there. And it'll be rewarding. So it'll be cool, man. Sharpen my skill set. And, it's definitely a different experience than leading adults, man. My hat off to youth pastors around the world. Cause that's a tough gig.
It is. And another thing I'll say is like, I've learned from coaching with Chad about like, man, sometimes they just need to be silly a little bit, and like constantly trying to keep them on lock and on focus, like starts to send them away. Right. Then they stop listening. They're like, man, I don't want to hang out with Kev. Yeah. He's always making sure my shoes are tied and I'm sitting with my feet on the floor and whatever.
Cause they got that from their parents in the morning, then their teachers during the day, and then their coach after school. And now like, it's just more of the same.
Yeah. You have to find that spot where it's okay to be whatever, and then lead and then check and all that around it. It's way more fluid than just leading adults. Where you're like, okay, here's what we're gonna do, and it's very different. Very different.
I had all
right. Who's Tanner, man? Who's this guy?
Yeah, so he's the one I mentioned, the warrior that's leading 6th graders. But yesterday we had a kid that had a loose tooth, and I had to call Sadie on it. I'm like, hey, it's got metal on it. It's one of the molars, like it's wiggly. And she said, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. But we still called the mom. And he was asking me a question, and I'm looking in his mouth. I'm like, bro, I just see a loose tooth. I'm a construction guy. So it's a 10-year-old kid. I'm not going to give him medical advice. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Vice grips.
Yeah. Here, let me snag that thing real quick. So after he leaves, the dude behind me is like, oh man, I'm in construction too. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, I just figured that'd be the extent of the small world. Yeah. And I'm like, what do you do? He's like, oh yeah, waterproofing. I'm like, oh, no kidding. Where do you work? Chamberlain. I'm like, what? That's insane, dude. So I started telling him about dynamic and the parallels between that, and how we're next to each other, like glazing systems and waterproofing. He knows all about it.
Yeah, right.
And then I mentioned Andy Wharton, and I'm texting Andy Wharton. I'm like, yeah, it's a good buddies in the Texo EDP with us. And I loved it because then him and I hit it off. We started talking about work and nerdery and all that sort of stuff. And now he's my boy.
What do you do when the detail says X? How do we
can nerd out? Yeah. We can talk about overlap flashing and lack of silicone between the overlap flashing.
Oh, boom. So good.
Exactly. But man,
did I tell you my small world moment at small group for William? I think I did. And then you get all confused as to how there was a guy I'd been hanging out with 7 years I didn't know.
Yeah, but tell it.
Yeah. Did I tell it on here or was it just me and you?
I think it was just remember. Me and you.
Sorry if I've told it before. No, at William's small group we're just talking about, they have like every, I guess kind of around the beginning of the school year, they have a kickoff meeting. And so it's parents and like casting vision for the year. Here's what we're going to do this year, and here's what you can expect, and here's what. And so that it's as everything is wants to do, centered around a meal of some sort. So we go over to one of the family's houses, leaned up against the kitchen island, like eating tacos, and this guy standing next to me was one of William's buddies' dads, whom I know. He goes, "So, I was listening to y'all's podcast the other day." I looked at him like he was an alien. I was like, what? How do you there's no, and then he tells this like long story. He's like, well, I know so-and-so. He's not in construction or anything. He's like, I know so-and-so and so-and-so knows so-and-so. And they were listening and they said, I need to be listening. And so I was mowing the grass on Saturday and just started listening to y'all's podcast. It's great. Guess what episode he started on though? I told you this. He's like, I started at the beginning. And I was like, no.
So Roger answered the phone. I know past, present, future, but let's call it today.
Sure.
He answered the phone when I called him. He's like, hello, my name is Kevin Carey. I'm like, all right, bro. He always likes busting my chops, man.
That's funny.
But I can't do it.
We've said it.
I can't
said it a few times. We've come a long way.
Time hop, like on your phone, like this day 5 years ago. I was about to send a memory to somebody, and then I heard my stupid voice, and I just and I just put it away. I didn't even send it to the guy. And I do a podcast. How ironic.
I've gotten immune to all of it. This is just the way I sound. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, at least we're just casually talking now. And it's not like,
bullet
point 32, Stewie.
Yeah,
we skipped 32. Talking. I got a ruler, and I'm like going down the sheet.
Not anymore.
Yeah. You're like 138, 14, 27.
And we always end up where we end up.
Yep.
Okay, so I don't know. I think that kind of gets us through the season of Kev, and maybe gives listeners something to think about in terms of finding spaces to lean in and be present and listen. Perhaps listen more.
It's worth it.
Yeah, it's worth it to hear that word, however you actually hear it.
Yep.
We have a couple in the hopper. You want to give us a preview, or just want to be surprising? No, I'll give you a preview.
Yeah. Why don't you do that?
So, I guess I've been leading the charge the last, I don't know, 3 months on folk, like programming a little bit more so than usual. So shocker, here's what's coming up next.
Yeah.
So we're going on our peer group retreat coming up in a couple of weeks. I guess it's the end of this week at the date of release with Time Warp, right? And so our plan is to do it'll probably lean a little more industry for the next week or two. We're going to do like some recordings with our peer group guys talking about things they're thinking about at their businesses, issues they're wrestling with personally, business things that are going on, leadership lessons that they've learned in the last year since we've circled up with them. So it'll be interesting to catch up with them sort of impromptu. Like there's no agenda. We bought some new equipment. It'll probably all go terribly awry, and like everything will be way high gain and really loud hard to listen to. But then it depends on how much content we catch from them, either the next one or two. And then my buddy Mike Bassett's coming on, the guy who wrote the book In the Ditch. He's a trial lawyer friend of mine, who has a very interesting story. Super compelling. Friend of Amy Stewart is how I got connected to Mike Bassett quite some time back. And very compelling story, very interesting dude, very fun LinkedIn follow.
He wrote a memoir about our podcast?
No, In the Ditch is not about that. It's actually about, as an attorney, kind of falling into a really destructive pattern with clients and eventually ending up in a really bad spot. And he very vulnerable about that story and how he ended up there and why he ended up there. And as a result of that, does a lot of like coaching and mentoring for young lawyers to say, "Hey, whoa. Let me tell you what's going to happen, and let's talk about avoiding this literal ditch." And so that's what his book's about. So Michael, join us, and then a few more in the hopper, but that'll get us through the next 3 weeks.
That's cool, man. I'm excited for this week, next week, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. I hope we can find some space to gather up our equipment and record a few things. But that notwithstanding, it'll be good to spend time with folks that we haven't seen them in a little bit. Like, it's been a long time since we've been able to get together as our peer group to talk about stuff, just because our lives have been so busy. So kudos, I think, to have we said it yet? Kudos to Colby. Yeah, for getting us cats wrangled together. Oh, yeah, because I remember he sent me a cat wrangling GIF one morning, and I was like, what is this about? And he's like, on the podcast. But yeah, shout out to Colby again for getting us together.
That's it, man.
All right, we'll see you guys next week. And in the meantime, y'all stay out there, keep moving mountains.